Yes, sir. This one better. Good evening. My name is Stan Carboni. I am the Director of Programs and Exhibits for the Jewish Heritage Center of Western Canada. I would like to welcome you to this evening's program titled Max Zev Blankstein, Canada's first registered Jew. The Jewish Heritage Center is located on ancestral lands on Treaty 1 territory. The Red River Valley is also the birthplace of the Métis. We recognize the historical fact emphasized by the Truth and Reconciliation Commission of Canada, the national inquiry into missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls, and as acknowledged by the Government of Canada, that the Canadian government and various religious and secular organizations that predate the country perpetuated a genocide against the Indigenous peoples, and that elements of that genocide continue to the present. We affirm that our commitment to never forget must also include confronting attempts to destroy Indigenous culture and nationhood and condemning attempts to deny that historical reality. The purpose of the Jewish Heritage Center of Western Canada is to develop, preserve, interpret, and disseminate information on the history and culture of Western Canadian Jewry, and to develop awareness of the historical, moral, and ethical implications of the Holocaust and other human rights violations. We have incorporated into our operations numerous means for carrying out our objectives, including exhibits, publications, guided tours of our Hallway Museum and Holocaust Education Center, lectures, and panel presentations. The Jewish Heritage Center brings together the Marion and Ed Vickers Jewish Museum of Western Canada, the Genealogical Institute, the Jewish Historical Society Archives, and last but certainly not least, the Freeman Family Foundation Holocaust Education Center. The synergy created by these entities forges a pathway to the future and preserves and shares compelling stories and educating present and hopefully future generations. I would like to call on the indefatigable and dedicated chair of the Programs and Exhibits Committee, Dan Stone, who we often refer to as the fourth staff person, without remuneration, of course, to conduct what promises to be an informative and entertaining program on Max Zev Blankstein, Canada's first registered Jewish architect. Thank you. Dan?
Thank you very much, Stan. The I'll return the compliment and double it if I can, because your contributions over the last 20 years, or perhaps even more, are quite remarkable. It's impossible to think of the Jewish Heritage Center without the work that you've done in all sorts of areas. Tonight, tonight we are working on the introduction to Max Zev Blankstein, architect, first registered Jewish architect in Canada. As an historian, I'm more used to going from earlier times to later times, but it's really interesting now because last year, or actually several years ago, we did a program on the architecture firm Green, Blankstein, and Russell, which involved two sons of Max Zev Blankstein. And now tonight we're getting to the origin of it, the interest of the way that the remarkable Blankstein family moved into the field of architecture, one which they have made innumerable contributions. The importance is obvious. You know, I've lived in Winnipeg for more than 50 years now. I was near the Uptown Theater for quite a while and now realize that it was a contribution by Max Zev Blankstein, although sadly one that he didn't see completed. And also crossing the Salter Bridge, and always saw the Winnipeg cold storage and wondered what that was. And there's another one of his contributions as an architect. There are many more, as you will learn tonight, if you don't already know it. It's a significant topic for Winnipeg Jewish community, and its development. It's unusual in our history, especially in the early days before the First World War, to have immigrants coming with professional qualifications. And here we have with Max Zev Blankstein, one of the earliest ones who led the Jewish community in these new directions. Tonight's program has been organized in conjunction with the Winnipeg Architecture Foundation, which sponsored this book on Max Blankstein by Murray Peterson, one of tonight's speakers. Together, they did an exhibit, a larger exhibit on the Max Blankstein project that was at the Millennium Library for a month or two, and parts of which are on display in our museum at the Asper campus. And I invite you to come take a look sometime. If you're interested in Winnipeg architecture, please become acquainted with the Winnipeg Architecture Foundation website and the rest of its work. Tonight, we will concentrate on Max Blankstein. Talks by three speakers with special qualifications. A note just now before we get started, we will have our three speakers, Murray Peterson, Murray Blankstein, Gerry Posner. There'll be a question and answer section or a comment section at the end. Because of the way webinars are set up, please use the Q&A box probably at the bottom of your screen on iPads and maybe some computers at the top of your screen. The chat line will be used for comments that audience members may share among themselves, but to pose a question or make a comment that I will read later during the Q&A question, please use the Q&A box. Now let me introduce our first speaker. Murray Peterson has spent over 30 years researching and writing about Canadian history, its people, buildings, and important events. As chief researcher for the City of Winnipeg Historical Buildings and Resources Committee, as researcher and writer for Parks Canada, as stamp researcher and designer for Canada Post, and other involvements. North Enders may have a special interest in his research and preparation for the Scotia Street Interpretive Walk. Murray Peterson's projects range from Indigenous research to family genealogy to published institutional histories and interpretive panels and displays. He has successfully completed a wide range of projects for government departments, companies, groups, and individuals. He can also be found in the classroom, sharing his knowledge with students of all ages or with his 5 grandsons. Murray, please go ahead now.
Thank you very much. Good evening, everyone. My name is Murray Peterson. Thanks, Dan, for that introduction. I've got a PowerPoint presentation ready for you, and we're just going to run through it. And we're going to talk tonight. I have the pleasure and honor of speaking tonight about one of Winnipeg's most outstanding architects, Max Blankstein. Max designed hundreds of buildings in Winnipeg and all across the prairies in his career. I would like to, before we get going, I'd like to acknowledge the generous help of the Blankstein family who made this project possible. In particular, I'd like to thank Murray Blankstein, who was invaluable with his information, his images, his editing, and his support. And next slide, please. This is my book on Max, and it would not have been possible without the design and editing crew at the Winnipeg Architecture Foundation and its leader, Susan Algie. They took my scribble notes and my mistakes and my typos and all of that and made something really spectacular, kind of like Max did with all his buildings. Next, please. So Max's story begins in Odessa, Ukraine in 1874, and it includes upheaval and new beginnings, and ends with a successful, most would call trailblazing career and a remarkable legacy that continues today. The port city of Odessa on the Black Sea grew in size and stature in the 19th century, its Jewish population increasingly participating in the region's economic, political, and cultural life. Next, please. Max's father was a contractor and a stonemason in Odessa, who, to protect his loved ones, changed the family name to Blankstein and their nationality to Austrian. This was not, however, enough to shield them from the rising anti-Semitism of the Russian Empire of the late 19th and early 20th century. Next, please. Max was born in 1874, 3 years after Russian mobs killed and looted Jewish citizens in Odessa and elsewhere. Russian law discriminated against Ukrainian Jews and often excluded them from educational opportunities. Despite this, Max received training as a contractor and as an architect. There are three known extant examples of Max's designs in Odessa. Three of them are shown here, and 2 of them show the architectural detailing that Max would apply to his projects in Western Canada. Next, please. In 1902, Max married Esther Goldwyn, and the couple had 2 children, Verna in 1902 and Isaac Wolf in 1904. With war breaking out between Japan and Russia, the 2 faced a new wave of conscription. Max and his brother-in-law, Gershon G. Golden, traveled to Hamburg and then boarded ships to North America. They reunited in Winnipeg. Blankstein worked for the railroad and by year's end had made arrangements for his family to join him. Next, please. So what did the pair of them find when they arrived in Winnipeg? Well, they found a city on the cusp of the greatest decade of growth in its history, a city bursting at its seams as immigrants from Eastern Canada and around the world found work in its growing economy. Its population grew over 200% between 1901 and 1911. And during that same period, the value of building permits increased over 1,000% to nearly $15 million by 1911. Next, please. Of course, the economic successes of the established Winnipeggers was not always enjoyed by the immigrant communities. Often, the growing immigrant population settled in language-based groups, and they often settled near their place of employment. A high percentage found work in the Canadian Pacific Railway yards, which physically and psychologically divided the North End from the rest of Winnipeg. Next, please. But that's not to say that the immigrant communities didn't flourish, because they did. Along Main Street, Selkirk Avenue, and other thoroughfares, they started businesses and opened professional offices. They offered items and services from the old country, often in several languages. Next. Max's wife Esther and their two children, her mother and sister, arrived in Winnipeg in 1905. Sadly, Max's wife died in 1906, and Max married his sister-in-law, Leitka Lena Golden, in 1907. The couple, got all excited. The couple had 5 more children: Cecil Nathan in 1908, Eva Rebecca in 1909, Evelyn in 1930, Frederick Inge in 1921, and Morley in 1924. Next, please. And it was quite a family. 4 of the children distinguished themselves in design and architecture and construction. Wolf was a theater owner and contractor. Cecil was a founding member of Green Blankstein Russell, founded in 1931 and growing into one of Winnipeg's most influential firms, now known as Stantec. Evelyn, the second female graduate with a Bachelor of Architecture degree from the University of Manitoba, enjoyed a long and respected career. And Morley, a founding member of the architectural firm Coop and Blankstein in 1956, which would ultimately become known as Number 10 Architectural Group, with many outstanding designs across the country. In fact, several of Max's grandchildren also followed his footsteps and had careers in planning and design. Next, please. Look, he's getting ready for work. So what I've found in my research of Max's professional career is a very talented designer who was as comfortable designing a plain house or a small garage or a sturdy mixed-use block as he was designing a wondrous theater. He was versatile, he was well-known, and he was very busy. Blankstein's name first appears in a City of Winnipeg building permit in 1907, and in 1910, he registered with the Manitoba Association of Architects, the first licensed Jewish architect in Canada. He would register with the Saskatchewan organization in 1929. That began over 2 decades of work throughout the city and into Saskatchewan, although most of the work was found in Winnipeg's North End. Much of Blankstein's work was built on regular clientele within Winnipeg's strong Jewish community. Oftentimes, he would design numerous structures for the same company or family. Blankstein designed the Zimmerman block in 1913 for jeweler William Zimmerman. The main floor bay display windows are quite unique. They're slightly rounded and topped by a roof of bronze scales, and these have been unchanged since construction. But it's in the stone cladding of the upper floors where we can see his flair for ornamentation. The 2 bays feature a wealth of detailing, from pilasters with iconic capitals to oversized brackets, carved garlands, keystones, and grotesques of lions' heads and women's heads set below and above the 3rd-story windows. The oversized cornice finishes this detail. The facade would have been ordered by Blankstein from a catalog, shipped to Winnipeg, and installed by tying it to the wall behind. As you can see by these images, he could ornament with the best of them, or he could not. Much of his work is firmly based in classical architecture, symmetry, varying materials, and detailing. Many of his designs utilize diamond or other geometric shaped panels. Cladding could be brick or stone, but also pigmented stucco. Pictured here is a public garage at 167 Logan Avenue, built in 1916, and it's one of my favorite designs by Blankstein. It's a beaut. The Continental block at 794 Main Street was built as a mixed-use commercial apartment block in 1911. The Talmud Torah Hebrew School at 220 Albert Street, built 1922. The European block, also known as Obie's Steam Bath and Apartments, built in 1914, and the H&M Weidman and Company Warehouse, 230 Jarvis Avenue, built in 1910, and that one's demolished. Selkirk Avenue, heart of Winnipeg's North End, is practically a library of Max Blankstein design buildings. Some of his designs are modest, but there are also theaters, office buildings, and commercial blocks. Pictured here are the Budnick block, 594 to 602 Selkirk, built in 1910 and added to in 1929. The Merchants Hotel, originally the Steinman block, 541 Selkirk Avenue, built for Lithuanian hardware merchant Robert Steinman in 1913 and converted into the Merchants Hotel in 1933, which has now recently been reimagined into community space. The Palace Theatre, 501 Selkirk Avenue, built in 1912, and the Hebrew Association Hall and Theatre at 239 Selkirk Avenue, built in 1890 as a Presbyterian church, but converted into a theatre and meeting hall in 1909 by the Hebrew Sick Benefit Association. It was given an Art Deco facade in the 1930s and operated for many years as the Queen's Theatre. Several of Blankstein's designs had to solve unique problems. This is the Film Exchange building on Hargrave Street and built in 1922. It was designed to store and distribute reels of highly flammable motion picture film. The building included an interior automobile ramp to facilitate the moving of this material. In 1937, much of the building was converted into offices. Max's son Morley and his partner Isidore Koop opened their first architectural office in this building in 1956. Winnipeggers loved apartment blocks. Between 1906 and 1915, no city of any size in Canada built more. The demand was high because of a number of factors. Our wonderful climate, developers realizing that they could see a steady return on their investment, and of course, traveling salesmen. Blankstein, like his contemporaries, designed a number of blocks, from plain, functional buildings full of small, functional suites to luxury blocks with all the amenities. This is the Rubin block, also known as the Morley Apartments, 270 Morley Street at Osborne. It was built as a mixed-use block with commercial space on the ground floor and apartments above. It was completed in 1914. Again, you can see the classical detailing at the roof line and in the ornamental stone surrounds of the entrances. This is the North Panama block, 229 McRae Avenue, built in 1914. The design is simple, attractive, and it fits well into its neighborhood. After Max's death and the sale of their home at 131 McRae, his widow and children moved into a suite in this block. This is the Jesse block, a large apartment block designed by Blankstein in 1914, one of his largest contracts. Again, we see he wasn't afraid to make a statement with his design and provided a number of elements to animate the facades and to provide light and air into the suites. An important contract was the design of the Winnipeg Hebrew Free School on Charles Street, constructed in 1913. Classically detailed, again, the institution had grown from 1907 to need a larger, more modern facility. It occupied this building until 1952. As you can see from this slide, Max was also skilled at designing unique single-family homes, used colors, materials, and ornamentation to give them their own character. 256 Garfield Street South was built in 1927 for Furrier Morris Kim. The Max Blankstein home is 131 McRae. It was built in 1922. 133 McRae is the Daniel Smith House, built in 1931. And 283 Kingsway is the William McMartin House, built in 1912. Like all in his profession, World War I and then the up and down economics of the late 1910s and the 1920s would affect Max's business negatively. And while he continued to design all types of buildings throughout his career, it was theaters where Max Blankstein excelled, bringing uniqueness to the basic designs. Theater buildings were once as important a part of the experience as the movies themselves. Chaser lights would gaudily outline facades of vaudeville theaters, and this gave way to movie theaters with opulent and imaginative exteriors and interiors. Blankstein proved that he could design a comfortable, small-town movie house or a lavish building with Spanish villas underneath star-filled skies in an auditorium. And Max established ties with Jacob Jack Miles, one of Western Canada's premier theatre owners and owner of 18 theatres in Winnipeg at its peak. Here we see two Roxy theatres. The left is at 385 Henderson Highway. It was built in 1929 for the Allied theatre chain of Jack Miles and Nathan Rothstein. It was converted into the Roxy Bowling Lanes in 1960 and is now slated for demolition. The right Roxy is 20th Street West in Saskatoon. It was completed in 1930 at a cost of $73,000. And you can see a bit of the Spanish villa behind the theater goers to the in the picture on the right there. The Rose Theatre, 801 Sargent Avenue, was opened in 1926 and is now partially used as a daycare center. The Palace Theatre, 501 Selkirk Avenue, built in 1912, but was expanded and given a new front facade in 1927, 1928. On the left is the Lido Theatre in the Paw, opened in 1929 and still operating, although there's a rumor that it's going to close. On the right is the demolished Broadway Theatre, opened in Regina, Saskatchewan in 1929. Here are two excellent examples of Max's ability to provide his clients with visually unique buildings: the subdued classicism of the Lido and the exuberant Spanish revival of the Broadway. This is the Roxy Theatre in Yorkton, Saskatchewan. It was opened in 1928 and demolished in 1964 for a bank parking lot. And so it goes. Undoubtedly, Max's masterpiece was the Uptown Theatre on Academy Road, opened shortly after his death in 1931. From the striking exterior with twin towers and red tile roofs and unique windows to the exotic interior designed as a Moorish village set under a dark blue ceiling, sky twinkling with stars. The building's original interior was removed when it was converted into a bowling alley, and the exterior had begun to show signs of aging by the 2010s. Its recent conversion into residential space has meant the careful restoration of the front facade, and a portion of the original entrance ceiling that was discovered once construction had begun has been expertly restored. And it has been returned to its original beauty. And that is a brief look at the life and career of Max Blankstein. It is a testament to the abilities of another of Winnipeg's immigrant citizens, and the Blankstein legacy is undeniable. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Murray, for that that expert. Sorry, I'm just take a moment to readjust things here, but thank you for that very excellent survey. And for the rest of you, I recommend the more full account in this book that was shown at the beginning. And as you can see, there are lots of pictures, photographs, texts, some drawings when necessary, and it's a very it gives an even more full picture. Now our next speaker, as I adjust, well, Murray Peterson, I have a number of questions, but I'll wait till the end and I'll see who else has questions as well. Our next speaker will be Murray Blankstein, a name which is now familiar to you. If not, he another member of this very distinguished family. Murray Blankstein is researching and working on the history of the Blankstein family. He is a retired lawyer who lives in Toronto. Born in Calgary in 1936, son of Wolf and Ida Blankstein, grandson of Max Zev Blankstein and Max's first wife, Esther. Murray's family moved to Winnipeg in 1944, where he attended Grosvenor School, Robert H. Smith, and Kelvin. He earned his BA and LLB degrees at the University of Manitoba, and was admitted to the Manitoba Bar. Then he went on to get an MBA and Master in Law degree from Columbia University in New York and stayed there to work as a lawyer for CBS. However, he moved to Toronto in 1965, establishing a law practice, and there he married Ellen Okun in 1967. They have two children. In addition to practicing law in Toronto, Murray became involved in his father-in-law's business relating to aspects of real estate. During this time, Murray served on a number of community boards, grew and showed orchids, and was an avid sailor. Retired from the practice of law and divested of business interests. He has become involved in this study of the Blankstein family. Murray, would you please go ahead?
Thank you for inviting me to participate in this session on the Max Blankstein Architect Display at the Jewish Heritage Center. I wish to thank the Winnipeg Architecture Foundation, Susan Alge, its director, and Murray Peterson for their work on the Max book, and also the Heritage Center regarding the current display and facilitating this session. Max Blankstein was my grandfather. I am the second oldest of his living first-generation grandchildren. In referring to his offspring, I am referring to the offspring of that Blankstein and Golden union in 1900, when Max married Esther Golden, his first wife, who bore his first two children, my father being the second. Sadly, Esther died in 1906 at the young age of 26. Later the following year, Max married again. His second wife was Leica Golden, Esther's sister, who gave birth to the other 5 children of this union. The book on Max highlights the impressive number and quality of work Max produced over an amazingly short period of about 27 years. Those years were fraught with great danger, sadness, depression, and despair, but also there were periods of burgeoning growth and great hope. Max's architectural contributions helped change Winnipeg and contributed to its growth. Many, like other immigrants, Max took great risks to leave his home, which was then in Odessa, and build a new life in Canada. I would like to briefly talk about Max's legacy in the context of my family. I am proud of my family. Max's descendants have made significant contributions to many fields, including science, art, design, education, foreign service, public service, business, medicine, and in the military. There is a trait of perseverance and acting with good conscience that members of my family inherited from Max. Today, I will highlight just a few of my relatives who specifically carried on my grandfather's architectural legacy. Max's first child, Verna, died while still a teenager during the Spanish flu epidemic. My father, Wolf Blankstein, was Max's second child. When he was growing up in the early decades of the last century, theater entertainment had become a significant factor in the life of Canada's growing population, not only as an entertainment diversion from the hard aspects of daily life, but also for cultural expression. The films accompanied almost always with a newsreel. Early in his career in Winnipeg, Max had the opportunity to design assembly halls and theaters. He embraced theater design. Not only was he good at it, he was successful with it. As a teenager, Wolf became enamored with movies and that burgeoning industry. However, observing at close hand the effort and tribulations of his father in attracting, working with, and satisfying clients, and getting repeat business, all of which was subject to the vagaries of the larger economy, Wolf realized that architecture was a difficult profession. However, exposed to the industry through his father's work, Wolf decided that he wanted to be in the movie business. Much to the chagrin of his father, who wanted him to go on to university, instead, Wolf moved to Toronto, where he obtained employment in the distribution sector of the film industry, working his way up to the position of branch manager. While such, he was instrumental in the building of the Kinema and Tivoli theaters in Calgary and the North Main Drive-In in Winnipeg, all designed by his brother Cecil Blankstein's architectural firm. By 1947, Wolf had come to the realization that there was no longer that there's no long-term future for him in the distribution side of the movie industry, that he had always been enamored with building construction. And that's where his future would be. While still working in film distribution, he built the 4 modernist houses on Burbank Street, which were designed by Cecil's firm. Finally, in 1954, Wolfe withdrew completely from the movie business, joining his brother Cecil, and together with contractor Henry Borger and realtor Irving Margulis, formed Great West Development Company, which was involved in the development of the subdivisions Silver Heights in St. James and Windsor Park in St. Boniface. In 1958, Wolfe established his own company to build architecturally designed homes. Max's third child was Cecil Blankstein. Cecil followed in his father's footsteps. Throughout all of his student years, Cecil assisted his father with drafting and other tasks in Max's practice. While still a student during the summer of 1925, Cecil worked as a laborer on the building of the Hudson's Bay Company building on Portage Avenue. That fall, he enrolled in the architecture program at the School of Engineering at the University of Manitoba. Cecil took over his father's practice when Max died on New Year's Eve, 1931. With Lawrence Green and later Les Russell, and over its more than 72 years of existence with other partners joining, the firm evolved as Green Blankstein Russell and Associates, later simply called GBR. That firm has made a significant mark on Winnipeg as well as across Canada. By the middle of the 20th century, it was a major player in the Canadian architectural field and a significant contributor to modernist architectural practice in this country. It also led the way in breaking the gender barrier at architectural firms across Canada, when in 1950 it hired Debbie Lexier, who had a degree in interior design. It was also the first to create an integrated practice of architects, engineers, interior designers, and planners, then a novel interdisciplinary approach fostering teamwork and diversity. When the partners created a shareholding company, GBR Limited, for succession purposes, they ensured the longevity of the firm and created opportunities for many of the staff to have long and satisfying careers with it, including a first-of-its-kind pension plan, affording them a retirement possibility with a level of financial comfort. Max's fifth child, Evelyn Blankstein, was the first Jewish woman to earn a Bachelor of Architecture degree in Manitoba. That was in 1935, and as of that date, she was either the first or second woman to earn that degree in Western Canada. While at the University of Manitoba, she was awarded the Outstanding Woman Athlete of the Year for 1934-35. She was active and excelled in almost every sport, including track and field, curling, basketball, swimming, baseball, and tennis. Quoting from the Winnipeg Architecture Foundation biography series, Evelyn was the leader who pioneered, lived, and worked the concept of gender equality. She worked as an architect when there were few Winnipeg women in a profession that was considered a male preserve. The two children who did not follow in occupations related to design and construction were Eva Dolgan, the fourth in birth order of Max's children. She was also a star student and athlete who became a nurse. And there was Fred, or as he was known by his family and friends as Ingy, the sixth in birth order of Max's children. He became a doctor, but before completing his schooling, served in the Canadian Army during World War II, seeing action in two of its most difficult battles, Ortona in Italy and the Battle for the Scheldt in the liberation of Holland. Max's seventh and the youngest of his children was Morley Blankstein. I recall Morley relating memories of playing in his father's office and watching Max at work. When Morley had advanced beyond the toddler stage, he often went with his father to various building sites to inspect the work. He was just shy of his 8th birthday when Max passed away. At the age of 17 in 1941, Morley enrolled at the University of Manitoba, taking courses that would qualify him to enter the architecture program at the university. However, the following year, he enlisted, joining the Royal Canadian Air Force and trained to be a pilot. While waiting to be sent to Europe for active duty, the war in Europe ended. After his discharge, he enrolled in the architecture program at the University of Manitoba, graduating in 1949. In 1950, he went to Chicago to study at the Illinois Institute of Technology under the renowned Mies van der Rohe and Ludwig Hilbersheimer. Morley returned to Winnipeg, rejoining GBR in 1952, the year he married Marjorie Rady. In those early years, he was instrumental in the design for GBR's new office building at 222 Osborne Street North and the new Winnipeg General Post Office. Morley, along with his friend Isidore Coop, were the lead designers on GBR's entry in the competition for a proposed new National Gallery of Canada to be built in Ottawa. Their submission won the competition, but the design was not built due to politics. In 1956, Morley and Isidore Coop withdrew from GBR and established their own firm, which was joined in 1959 by Doug Gilmore and Alan Hanna. Out of 48 entries in 1964, their firm won the national design competition for the Mendel Art Gallery and Conservatory in Saskatoon, which has been described as one of the finest examples of modernism in Saskatchewan. That year, the firm merged with Alan Weisman and Jack Ross, the combined firm taking the name Number 10 Architectural Group. The list of projects that Morley and the subsequent iterations of his architectural firm designed is both extensive and notable. A list of Morley's associations and endeavors would include the following: Fellow of the Royal Architectural Institute of Canada, elected to the Royal Canadian Academy of Arts, honorary aide-de-camp to His Honor Richard S. Bowles, Lieutenant Governor of Manitoba, board member of the Royal Manitoba Theatre Centre. His firm, Number 10, designed the Royal Manitoba Theatre Centre building on Market Avenue. He was a board member of the YMHA, a board member and chair of living arrangements for the Age and Opportunity Centre, national chairman of Canadian Technion, named honorary fellow of Technion, and he established a lectureship in the Faculty of Architecture and Town Planning at the Technion, and its annual sessions for that lectureship, held each year, is being held this week in Haifa. Chair of the Winnipeg Jewish Community Council, which ran the Combined Jewish Appeal from 1978 to 1982, and his firm designed the Asper Jewish Community Center, where the Jewish Heritage Center is located. I should also indicate a list of Marjorie Blankstein's, Morley's wife's, endeavors. They would include a member of the Order of Canada, member of the Order of Manitoba, honorary doctorate, University of Manitoba, active supporter of the Winnipeg Jewish Community Council, chair of the Asper Jewish Community Campus, Capital Campaign, United Way Campaign Chair, 1994, fundraiser and volunteer in a number of other communities, organizations, including non-Jewish and civic organizations, Winnipeg Community Council, Winnipeg Jewish Community Council, Winnipeg Combined Jewish Appeal, Rady Jewish Community Center, Morrow Center for Peace and Justice, Winnipeg Symphony Orchestra, Winnipeg Library Foundation, Age and Opportunity Center, Women's Health Research Foundation, YM and YWCA, the Association of Fundraising Professionals of Manitoba, University of Manitoba, Jewish Child and Family Service, National Council of Jewish Women, Women's Legal Education and Action Fund, Manitoba Theatre Center, and the St. Barnabas Hospital. That's the list. Incredible. I'm very proud of them.
Thank you very much, Mary Blankstein, for giving us some detail on the remarkable Blankstein family. It's really very interesting how the grandfather's interest, his architectural achievements, radiated for several generations and produced people with really quite unusual contributions to the Jewish community of Manitoba, to Manitoba in general, and to Canada as a whole. History is often top-down. You start with the important people, and maybe you hear something about the ordinary people underneath. So we asked Gerry Posner, not of course that he's ordinary, but at the time that he's going to be talking about, he was not remarkably distinguished on the national front. Anyway, Gerry, as many of you know, is a retired lawyer from Winnipeg who moved with his wife Sherna to Toronto over 10 years ago. As most of us know, his connections with the city of Winnipeg and the Jewish community of Winnipeg and the Jewish Heritage Center remain very strong. He has a deep love for all things related to the past in the Winnipeg Jewish community, and therefore was very interested in this topic for today's discussion, even though he has no direct relationship with Max Blankstein. Of course, he knows many of the Blankstein family members because Gerry knows everybody. Gerry has functioned as a prime interpreter of Winnipeg Jewish life, and especially families. He's worked as as a broadcaster and a columnist for the Jewish Post and News. His own family came to Winnipeg in 1906 and is described in the Jewish Foundation's Book of Life. One of Gerry's interests brought him to the Jewish Historical Society, now the Jewish Heritage Center. He was a volunteer for many years and a board member and the second president of the Jewish Heritage Center. He established the Yudasha and Shmeria Immigrant Archive in the Jewish Heritage Center. So Gerry, what was it like to go to the Uptown Theater or to other buildings that were designed and built by Max Blankstein?
Okay, Dan, thanks very much. I appreciate the opportunity to be a part of this program, which, in my opinion, is a program that's well-deserved. It's a piece of Winnipeg Jewish history, Manitoban Jewish history, in fact, Canadian Jewish history, and beyond that. And I'm glad that this program will be archived and available for anybody to see. Let me begin at the outset by saying to you, Dan, and to everybody else, that you are correct, that my knowledge of Max Blankstein, the architect, actually was none until I was given information about him by his grandson, Murray Blankstein, whom you just heard. I, of course, grew up well aware of the Blankstein family, and I might say, who could not have heard of the Blankstein family? They were well known for their work in the field of architecture and related areas. Anybody who lives in Winnipeg knows that. They were also well known for their philanthropy, and surely Morley and Marjorie are perfect examples of that. In addition, as I recall, Evelyn Blankstein, whom Murray talked about, she was, to my memory, she was a golfer of great renown, a female golfer. I'm going to guess that she probably was one of the best female golfers, Jewish female golfers. I'll limit it to that, but she was more than that in Manitoba. And in fact, I'm going to say she probably was the best Jewish female golfer in Western Canada. She was a great athlete. For a few years, I was neighbor of the late Arthur Blankstein, and I used to play floor hockey with Leo Blankstein. So bottom line is, who could not know the Blankstein family? As you have already heard, the Blankstein family had a major impact in Winnipeg, in Manitoba, and beyond. These contributions spanned 3 generations, and I think are still counting. My connection to Max was the book written about him, about which you've already heard, and will maybe even hear more. But my real connection, however, to him was via one of his works, the Uptown Theater that you asked about, Dan. The Uptown Theater was a place that I knew well. And that theater was designed by none other than Max Zev Blankstein. And I must admit, the fact that it was even produced or created by anybody was far from my mind, say in 1951 as an 8-year-old boy. What was on my mind was the actual theater and what was at the theater. Understand this was a period in the 50s. And if you can picture the scene, try and picture this scene. It is Saturday afternoon, and I, like many other children in River Heights at that time, Probably many of us had attended synagogue in the morning, not all of us, but a good chunk of us. And then there we were, full of energy, high-spirited, to put it very mildly. And what were our parents to do with us? Well, they found the perfect place to deposit their kids, the Uptown Theater. The Uptown, so usually around after lunch, just about every Saturday afternoon, say between 1 and 2 o'clock, we'd be dropped off and we'd congregate either outside the theater or in the lobby. The theater was located on Academy Road between Ash and Waterloo. And this building, created by Max Blankstein, in its own way, let me say this, it was far more than a theater. It was, as one of my friends put it, it really was an afternoon community youth center. Max didn't realize it when he created it, but that's what he did. To be clear, to get into the theater wasn't a big obstacle. Saturday afternoons, I think the entry to get in was 15 cents and popcorn was another dime. The programming was aimed entirely at children. I'm going to say between the ages of 7, 8, and 12 or 13. Now, what was this programming? Well, specifically, anybody who grew up at that time will remember Roy Rogers, Gene Autry, The Lone Ranger, Lash LaRue, the Durango Kid, Knights of the Round Table, Tom Mix, the Cisco Kid, Hopalong Cassidy, and there were others, including, I think, a Superman series each week. That was kind of the standard fare for part of the afternoon. And then, of course, who could forget the Movie Town News? The guy there had a distinctive voice and style as it was presented to us, all of us. Truth be told, we were so into this weekly entertainment. Ask any of us, even to this day, possibly we could recite the names of our favorite cowboy horses and their sidekicks. The format of the series kept us all coming back. As well, as I recollect, there were also Thursday night sneak previews, and some of us got to go occasionally with a parent who would take us. The theater itself was a spectacle, even to the untrained eye of a youngster. Each time you walked into that theater and you sat down, you had a very special feeling, we created an atmosphere of adventure and escape, as if you were in a courtyard of a castle, or perhaps you were in the setting of a long ago European town. What was so, I think, striking about the theater is that it imitated the sky with stars everywhere, and indeed slowly moving clouds. They were cloud formations, which you couldn't help but be captured by that. It was so unusual. It was as if you were lying outside in a summer night, gazing at the stars, completely amazed. It was something to behold, in my opinion, and all of us I'm sure we all remember that. On top of it all, the theater was designed in such a way that it allowed for an audience-friendly access stage, which hosted what I would call youth-oriented intermission programs, such as honoring a birthday party. And that happened frequently, where the family would assemble at a house and then they'd move over to the Uptown Theater for the rest of the day. One of my friends said he went to his first Uptown Theater birthday party. He thinks it was my birthday, to see the snows of Kilimanjaro. One of the main features in the intermission, and I bet most people who ever attended there will remember this, were the yo-yo contests. Those of my friends with whom I consulted about their respective memories mentioned they could recall Harvey Richmond as a consistent winner. And the late Sid Sheps, also a winner. And of course, my friend Michael Nozick also had his moment of glory, maybe more than one of them, due to his talent with the yo-yo. The snack bar in the lobby had a popcorn popper that produced and sold freshly made popcorn. Moreover, get this, the kids were highly motivated in the collecting of the discarded, used, empty popcorn boxes inside the theater, often under the seats. And then they'd take these boxes and they could trade them in and get another free box of popcorn. I think you had to get 10 boxes in order to get a free one. And I would say that was recycling ahead of its time. A not so well-known aspect of the theater, I was told, is that it was next door to a business known as Academy Florists. And there was a door through which you could enter the theater from Academy Florists. I never did that. Now, the other aspect about the theater that mostly everyone I asked acknowledged was the vivid memory of the manager of the Uptown, a Mr. Ostrander. I don't know his first name, but everybody remembered him. And this is the one thing that came out of everyone I asked. And I bet it's the memory of a lot of people that are watching this tonight. Everyone I asked that went to the Uptown Theater, the one thing they were all agreed on was Freddie Glazerman, also a blessed memory, who was the head usher there, maybe the only usher. How he came to that job, I do not know, but it is as if yesterday that I saw I see Freddie in a uniform, because he did have a uniform, and with his flashlight in hand, guiding us all to our seats. He was so diligent about his job, and it completely mystified me back then, still does, as to how he got the job. This is a contemporary of mine, and he's got a job working in the theater. Freddie was a pervasive presence and could best be described as the go-to guy at the Uptown, as he herded us all into the theater with a warm grin on his face. So all of this came from Max Blankstein. He had no idea, none, that what he was creating is not just the theater. He created a lifetime of memories for so many people, including myself and many of my contemporaries, spanning older than me and younger than me. So thank you, Max Zev Blankstein. That's what I want to say to you tonight.
And thank you very much, Gerry. I wouldn't be at all surprised if Max Zev Blankstein did not know what some of his designs, what impact his designs would have on the people who use the theater. Now, obviously, he wouldn't know in any detail about the popcorn machine or the yo-yo contest, but you need a certain kind of design in order to make these things possible. And part of his success as an architect was to create buildings that were useful and that people could do things with. Now, we've gotten to the Q&A section of it. People haven't written in very much. There's a comment from Sharon Love. Thanks for this trip down memory lane. My family, including my brother, our parents and grandparents, had many happy times at the Palace Theater. Who can forget the famous photo nights at all of these movie theaters? So it's not just the Uptown, but it's the other theaters which created many, many memories. Well, people are thinking of things that they might like to ask or like to say. I'd like to ask, well, everybody, but Murray Peterson in particular, about whether Max Blankstein faced discrimination in the architectural field. All professional fields were full of discrimination against Jews. How was he able to get his architectural paper so quickly, and how was he able to deal with how did the architectural field deal with him?
That's a terrific question. I think I think obviously there would have been discrimination. I don't think you're going to get away from that. But I think one of the things that helped his career was that he concentrated in the North End, and he had many return customers. So I think that he was able to carve out a good career just by the people that he knew in his own neighborhood, as it were. Yeah, I didn't find in my research any examples of any racism, but it would have been difficult to find examples of it. I'm sure it happened.
Did he have a one-man office? Did he work
Yes.
by himself?
Can I respond?
Please do.
Oh, you can hear me, okay. Yes, he worked by himself. He was a sole practitioner. And Cecil particularly, but his kids helped him in the office. But throughout his working life, he was a sole practitioner. And if I may say, with respect to the previous comment about discrimination, there is a picture of Max attending the Royal Architectural Institute meeting in Winnipeg at the Fort Gerry Hotel on September the 29th, 1922. And Max is in the front row with the other members. He's the only, appears to be the only Jewish member, as far as I'm aware, because I didn't recognize any other Jewish names. And he's in the front row, and certainly there was no indication that in the placement of all of the members of the Royal Architectural Institute from across Canada that attended that meeting, that he was being ostracized or treated negatively in any respect.
Dan, I'd like
Go ahead, Gerry.
I'd like to pose a question to the two Murrays, if either of them can answer. What struck me about the presentation was that here's a guy that actually worked as an architect in the Ukraine, and then comes to Canada and starts all over again and becomes a first registered architect, Jewish architect in Canada. And I'm saying to myself, how in the heck did you even get those? How did you even find out about the buildings that he worked on in the Ukraine? That had to be quite a challenge.
Well, we have to thank Susan Alge and Murray Peterson for that. Did some in-depth research.
I mean, that's astounding to think that in
Yeah.
2020.
I guess the search was through Joseph Barsky, who was who I got to. Joseph Barsky was a architect in Odessa at about the same time that Max was there, and I had done research on that on Barsky, and there was a paper written by Sergei Kravstov, who is I guess he's Russian or Ukrainian, but lives in Jerusalem, teaching at Hebrew University, and Sergei wrote a paper on Barsky, and I contacted Sergei to find out. And I guess it was through Sergei that we got some addresses. Sergei did some research, I guess, not sure whether it was Sergei or Sergei's contacts to the municipal records of the city of Odessa. And that's how we got it. And it pulled up the records from the city of Odessa, and there's Max Blankstein's name.
Well, it does occur to me that if I can put it in more contemporary terms and with a sports analogy, you have this guy that just became a star in American baseball from Japan, Ohtani. Well, Max Blankstein was the Ohtani of his time, only in architecture.
I don't know about that, but But
I
I
have
think
no
this is,
idea whether he could pitch.
I think this is,
What,
I think
actually,
this is a testament to the internet, what you can do with research.
yeah, if you don't mind, I'll jump in. That I got tons of information from the Blankstein family and from Susan Alge and the Architect Foundation. One of the things that we tried to prove and never really could find out was his education, because they were Jews in Odessa were not really allowed to or were stopped from taking higher education, but there was some sort of rumors that he had gone to a technical school in Odessa, and I got all the way to a registrar's office in one of the technical schools in Odessa today. Contacted somebody and they went through their records and we couldn't find him, but yeah, it's Murray Blankstein's right. It's amazing if you dig hard enough how far you can get online nowadays, but we couldn't actually prove that he had ever attended the school, or their records didn't show that he had. Not that he hadn't, but we couldn't prove that he had. So, and that's just part of the research.
Murray, you were in Odessa not that long ago. Were you ever could you even locate any of the buildings that he was connected to?
Not the buildings. We tried to locate the house,
Okay.
and that's an industrial building right now, or it was when we were there. But I just want to go back to the question of discrimination. Remember, Max designed several churches, in addition to several synagogues. So he was able to work within the broader community.
Right.
So I think that's a testament to his, how he worked in the community, how he lived in that community. He embraced the community.
Do you have any idea how well he spoke English?
I have no idea.
He
But
must-
all I know is that, and it's amazing that he navigated through the system, whatever the system was in Winnipeg at the turn of the century, 1905, 6, 7, 8, 10. I mean, I don't know the bureaucracy, work with the bureaucracy, fill out forms. I mean, not as complicated as today, but still had to be done.
Yeah, that's remarkable.
Well, he would have.
There's also, you forgot to mention, Murray, what you said, but your presentation was terrific. But Max also was an early Harley Davidson bike rider, 1912.
Definitely ahead of
Probably
his
couldn't
time.
afford a car, but a motorcycle, as it was, more like a motorized bicycle, was a way of getting around efficiently.
Way ahead of his time.
So he was regressive.
Murray Blankstein, could you tell us a bit more about Evelyn Blankstein? Now, she didn't design buildings, I understand. Is this a product of the difficulties that women had achieving a place in architecture, or is it some other factors?
I expect it might have been. She did work at Green Blankstein Russell. Her specialty was glass and glass frontages, glass windows, and she was very good at it, and she did that not only for GBR, but for the other architectural firms in the city. And then she got a position with Hobbs Glass, later Pittsburgh Glass. So that was her specialty. Glass storefronts, glass fixturing, all kinds of glass installations.
Well, it sounds as if it's by choice rather than something she's forced into.
Yeah, I mean, it was, I don't know. I mean, I never really put that question to her.
Can I ask you, Murray Blankstein, as I recollect, your cousin Arthur Blankstein wasn't an architect, but he was in a related
Interior
area.
designer.
He was.
He had a degree in interior design. Arthur was a very good interior designer.
That's what I thought. Okay. Yeah.
And if I may,
Susan
say,
Algie writes,
what?
sorry, go ahead.
No, it's okay. You go ahead.
We say that Susan Algie writes in to answer on my earlier question that says that the Winnipeg Architecture Foundation has a few letters that Max sent to the Manitoba Association of Architects, and they demonstrate a good command of written English.
Yes, and his writing abilities were excellent.
Wow.
Wouldn't it all be surprising if a well-educated man, and he was well-educated already in Ukraine, as if he had some studies in English?
Murray, have you ever been back to the house on McCrae?
Yes, I haven't been in it, but I've been to that house in McCrae. Yes.
It still stands, I presume.
Oh, yes, yes.
Wow. What a treat to go by some of these places that your family, that he created, they're still there.
Right. Well,
Susan Turner has a question about the construction workers that Max may have employed. Although he was a one-person office, he would have had to interact with engineers, masons, electricians, and others. Who were these people in the early years of Max's career, and how did he reach them? I'm assuming, she writes, some of them may have been East European immigrants, and it's possible that Max spoke several languages, likely.
I would expect, sure.
Can you add anything about the subsidiary trades that play such an important part in putting up buildings?
Yeah, I mean, that's a great question. There's certainly some of his building permits have day labor as the contractor, so there would have been gangs that would have helped out. A day of framing or a day of bricklaying or just moving. A day of digging or whatever was needed. So certainly some of his early contracts include that, or the permits include that. And then he worked, small and large contracts. He worked with all of the named contractors in the city. There was lots of them. The 1906 to 1914 period was on insane growth in Winnipeg. So there was lots of work, lots of money. Lots of need for modern buildings, and you would have had, small and large contractors, and all bidding on work. And then as it got busier, 1912 was the peak year. You'd have practically drag people off the street to help you build buildings, because the work would have been so widespread and there would be just so plentiful.
I want to comment on the way he would have worked with on his jobs. It wasn't all in the office. He spent a lot of time on site, working and actually designing on site, looking at a foundation, a wall, a particular condition in a building, and deciding that on the spot that it had to be altered in some way, and doing that on the spot. That was quite common. And Morley tells me Morley was involved, was called in for the Uptown Theater when it was converted to a bowling alley. And he had to do some work. He had his father's plans. And when they were doing the demolition, he found that walls and foundation elements were not as shown on the plans. So he said that probably the way his father worked was we would take a look at a situation and say, well, I think we got to make this foundation wall, make it 6 inches wider or whatever. We got to move it over here or adjust it this way or that way. And that would be on the site with the trades and not recorded in the plans.
Wow.
Yeah, and that's pretty common. Whenever I'm looking at original plans, I always say, well, the building as originally designed had this and this and this, and then as it was built was this and this and this, and oftentimes the architect showing great skill would, just like Murray Blankstein said, they would go in and say, no, we're going to need to, do this and this. And they certainly wouldn't mark up the plans. They would just get her done. So that was pretty common.
Right. These were not computer generated plans.
No.
The plans are the first draft. Gerry, did you have a comment? Your screen came on very briefly. Gerry Posner?
No, I stand in awe of the guy, and here's a man that basically started a whole new career in a whole new country with a whole new language. How many people could do that? And then to leave, lasting, impressions. He had deep footprints in a way that he could never have imagined. And I think that that's a real testament to this guy. Never mind the fact that he was the father of some significant other Blankstein descendants. So I think we're indebted to this man for everything that he did.
Well, thank you all very much. If there are no further questions, I think maybe I'll say that this is really has been quite an illuminating discussion. Not only has it given us the information about Max Blankstein and his family and their accomplishments, but it's also filled out the world out of which they came and the world that helped create these buildings. So I think that this has given us a very well-rounded picture of the world of Max Blankstein and the development of architecture, and especially Jewish architecture in Winnipeg. Stan, does that mean that you have something to say? I see your hand is up on that screen. If you do, please unmute yourself, and otherwise we'll just take it as a sign of approval.
Can I ask a question of Murray Peterson? Murray, could you talk to us more about the working relationship that he developed with Jack Miles and Nathan Rothstein? How did that come about?
Well, that's a very good question. That might be a Murray Blankstein question.
Murray Blankstein, yes.
I really don't have a definitive answer for that, except that this was a close community, and they had common interests, and they worked together. I mean, it was essential for all of them.
Yeah.
I've missed a couple of additional comments. Susan Turner, who's I'm very happy to hear from again, says that she lived on Bartlett Avenue near Osborne and Riverview for 20 years. That's a block away from the Rubin block on Morley and Osborne. On the Morley entrance, if I recall, there are steep steps. Max's buildings, except for the theater, seem to have been utilitarian. With these steep steps, perhaps an indication of an urge for a grander statement.
Ooh, good
Directs
question.
this especially to Murray Peterson, but of course anyone else who can answer would be fine.
Yeah, I mean that little garage that I like so much on Logan Avenue is quite a beautiful structure. It's balanced, and it's it's symmetrical, and it's got a very very subtle ornamentation. So I'm not. I guess that could be the case. Apartment blocks at that time, usually had a staircase. That I know the one that you're talking about. It is grander than a lot of them. Part of that would be the neighborhood. It would want he would want it a little bit grander. No, I think if you look at Max's career, he was extremely busy. And he designed a lot of work. I'm not sure that he was. I don't know that I would ever suggest that he was unhappy what he was doing. I think he loved designing little houses. I think he loved designing little garages and stables, and I think he loved designing big, beautiful theaters. I'm not sure that. I think he was just so good at his job, and he came at the right time and was at the busiest of Winnipeg and got a lot of really interesting work. I think it's it's a wonderful career. And again, to be, to come from halfway across the world and know nobody and create that career, I think is just a wonderful story. I was really surprised to how, when you start looking at what he did, how busy he really was. And when we did, there's a list of his buildings in the back of the book. That wasn't including all of the little, adding a summer kitchen or renovating, a basement or adding a basement to a house that didn't have one to begin with. He was very busy. He was a busy man. So I think he was happy doing it all.
Do you interpret his interest in ornamentation as coming from his Russian heritage, his Russian Empire heritage, or more generally from these? Of course, there's a lot of ornamentation used in Winnipeg as well.
I think he was designing in the style that was popular at the time, as all architects do. I think that the classical detailing, that served him quite well, and it gives you some leeway to design interesting things, but it also gives you a firm base. You sort of know where you're going to start when you have a blank blue page in front of you.
If I may comment, when before Max left Odessa in the late 1890s and early 1900s, there were some pretty prominent Russian architects at work in Odessa. He had to have seen their work. The Opera House was under construction. The major rail station was under construction, and these were monumental structures. And so there was some very prominent and very, interesting, substantial buildings under construction in the port. Odessa was, I think, the third largest city in the Russian Empire at that time, or the second largest. It was certainly the largest port. So it was very prosperous and very important. And so there were some important buildings.
And it was also a very rapidly growing city, especially in the late 19th century, so
Right.
that you'd have a great deal of new construction in the most modern style.
Right.
And you know what, maybe, Susan's right. You do enough summer kitchens on buildings, and once in a while you get to, you get a big contract and you get to stretch your legs a little bit and really design something with a lot of ornamental doodads on it, as I like to call them. So maybe, he did, when he got a chance, he really liked to flex his architectural muscles.
Now my screen seems to have frozen up for a second, but here we are then. Any final comments, or should we leave it with the last written comment by Susan Turner that it sounds as if he was a genius?
I think that's a good way to conclude.
And she's a good art critic, an artist herself, and historian, and a good critic. So thank you very much for telling us about Max Zev Blankstein, about the Blankstein family, and creating an idea of the world out of which this came and the world that came out of it. And thank you all very much. Now, I'd like to make a few more comments just to finish up. I'd like to, first of all, invite the audience to see the renovated and fully modernized Holocaust Education Center at the Asper campus. It's quite remarkable. And also invite you to check the website of the Jewish Heritage Center. Just type in Jewish Heritage Center and you'll come up with it, jhcwc.com. See the events, virtual exhibits, archival and genealogical searches, and historical vignettes that you'll quite a remarkable world of small comments on all kinds of issues, big and small. It's under the heading of Jewish Heritage Center Connects, under the heading of exhibits. Some of the upcoming programs that you may be interested in are on Sunday, April 16th at 7 p.m., the 15th annual Yom HaShoah Interfaith Commemoration held at Temple Shalom, 1077 Grant Avenue. There'll be a reading of the Megillat HaShoah, the Holocaust scroll. This year's lead reader will be Mayor Scott Gillingham. The very next day, Monday, April 17th at 7 p.m., launch of local Holocaust survivor Stephen Carter's memoir, A Symphony of Remembrance, and a celebration of his life. Dr. Carter died at the age of 96, just a short time ago. The book is part of the Azrieli Survivor Memoir series and will be available subsequently to schools and libraries at charge. Later that week, Thursday, April 20th, of course, this is the general commemoration of the Warsaw Ghetto Uprising as the center point of HaShoah, of the day of Shoah Day. April 20th at 7:30 p.m. If Scrolls Could Speak, Winnipeg's Czech Torah Scrolls, witnesses and survivors of Jewish communities lost in the Holocaust, featuring the 2 Czech Torah scrolls that survived the Holocaust and came to Winnipeg. Featured speakers, Lois Roman of the Memorial Scrolls Trust, Cantor Leslie Emery, Sherazedek, Mel Lazarek, Sherazedek, Rabbi Alan Fink, Temple Shalom. Next month, give you a chance to rest. Wednesday, May 24th at 7 p.m., Canadian Museum for Human Rights, the Caney Distinguished Lecture with Dr. Yossi Balin, prime initiator of both the Oslo Accords and the Birthright Program that has brought many young Winnipeggers to Israel. Balin will examine the relationship between Israel and the diaspora and the prospects of peace and relationship with the Palestinians under the government. Contact the Jewish Heritage Center or eventbrite.ca for tickets. And finally, in my list, Sunday, May 28th at 2 p.m. at Temple Shalom, 1077 Grant Avenue, The Soundtrack of Our Lives, Jews in Winnipeg's Music Industry. Speakers will be Owen Clark, an expert on jazz, John Einerson, rock and pop music, Len Udo, folk music, moderated by Kinsey Posen, Finjan, and CBC. So with all this, thank you very much to our panelists, to our technician, to our organizers. Thank you very much for the audience, and we'll see you next time. Good night.